She thought she was sending a message to the man who broke her heart, but destiny had other plans. One wrong number, one moment of anger, and a stranger on the other side of the city received the words that would change both their lives forever. What began as pain turned into healing. What started with betrayal became something no one expected, a story about love, redemption, and the kind of connection that only happens once in a lifetime. This is not a story about perfection. It's about two people who had every reason to give up on love, but somehow found it again, through mistakes, silence, and a message that was never meant to be read. It's about second chances that don't come wrapped in flowers, but in words sent to the wrong person at the right time. She was broken, angry, ready to erase everything that reminded her of him. He was rich, lonely, convinced that love no longer existed. Neither knew that a simple text, full of fury and pain, would bring them back to life. Because sometimes the universe doesn't make mistakes. It just sends the right message in disguise. As their worlds collide, secrets will surface, hearts will break, and love will prove that even the deepest wounds can heal when you least expect it. So stay with me till the end. This story will change how you see love, forgiveness, and destiny. The city was drowning in rain that night. Drops slammed against the glass of Lillian's apartment as she stood in front of the window, her reflection trembling under the dim kitchen light. Her breath came out uneven, her mascara streaked, and her hands gripped the phone like it was the only thing holding her together. The photo of Liam and Rachel still burned on her screen, his hand tangled in her best friend's hair, his lips where only hers should have been. The betrayal was so sharp it felt physical. She could almost hear his voice lying to her one last time. Her anger exploded before her reason could catch up. She opened her messages, fingers trembling, vision blurred with tears. "You disgust me," she wrote, thumbs flying. "You didn't just cheat, you killed the part of me that believed in love. I hope she's worth the ashes you left behind." Her tears fell faster than her words, hitting the screen like tiny storms. She didn't think, she didn't breathe, she just pressed send. The phone buzzed in her hand. Message delivered. A piece of her heart sent into the void. She didn't realize the mistake right away. Days ago, she had deleted his number in a desperate act of strength. In her rage, she had typed the digits from memory, missing one. One number. That was all it took to send her heartbreak to a stranger instead of the man who broke her. Her body slumped against the counter, chest heaving, the silence around her deafening. The rain outside kept falling, like the world was crying with her.
Across the city, in a glass tower that reached above the storm, Marco sat alone in his penthouse, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. The sound of thunder filled the emptiness that had followed him for years. Love, to him, was a ghost, something that used to exist before life taught him the cost of believing in people. When his phone buzzed, he almost ignored it, but the words on the screen pulled him in instantly. They were raw, bleeding, alive. A stranger's heartbreak in the middle of the night. He read it again and again. Each line cut into him in a way he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know her, but her pain mirrored something deep in him, the loneliness, the betrayal, the quiet ache of being left behind. His hand trembled slightly as he typed a reply. "Whoever he is," he wrote slowly, "he lost someone he'll never deserve again." The message sent. Outside, the storm raged on, but for the first time in a long while, Marco felt something flicker inside him, something that almost felt like hope. Marco didn't sleep that night. He sat on his bed, phone in hand, reading her words again and again. There was something in them, fury, heartbreak, honesty, that reached a part of him he thought was long gone. He didn't know who she was, but her pain felt too familiar. He had lived it once, years ago, when love had turned its back on him without explanation. Since then, he had learned to stop expecting anything real from anyone. He had built walls disguised as success. Work filled the hours, money filled the silence, but nothing filled the emptiness. The woman behind that message had no idea who was on the other side of her anger, and yet her words broke through where no one else had. They were raw, unfiltered, the kind of truth people usually hide. He found himself wondering what could have hurt her so deeply that even her rage sounded like heartbreak. Lillian, on the other hand, lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the stranger's reply. He lost someone he'll never deserve again. The message didn't fit Leon's voice. It carried empathy instead of guilt. Her anger tried to dismiss it, but her curiosity refused to die down. Who was this man replying to her pain? And why did his words sound like comfort? Marco typed, then deleted, then typed again. "You don't know me, but I think you deserved better." He hesitated before pressing send. He had no reason to care, no gain to chase, and yet something in his chest told him he needed to say it. Maybe it was about her, maybe it was about himself. When Lillian's phone buzzed again, she sat up, heart skipping a beat. She read the message slowly, her anger quiet for the first time in days. She didn't know who he was, but she didn't block him either. Instead, she whispered into the dark, "Who are you?" And somewhere across the city, Marco whispered the same question back. Lillian's chest still burned every time she thought of them together, Liam and Rachel. She could see their smiles, hear their laughter, the sound of betrayal echoing in her mind. Anger was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. So when the unknown man's message appeared again, calm and understanding, it only made her heart twist harder. She didn't want kindness. She wanted to fight, to scream, to make someone feel what she felt.
Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, and the words poured out before she could stop them. "You don't know anything about me," she wrote. "You don't know what it's like to give your heart to someone who destroys it." Her hands trembled, but she kept typing. "I was loyal. I was blind, and they laughed behind my back for months." She pressed send, breathing fast, as if the message could bleed the pain out of her. Marco read her words in silence. Each sentence hit harder than the last. He could almost see her through them, a woman trying to hold herself together by staying angry. He knew that kind of pain. It was the same fire that had once burned him alive. He wanted to tell her that not everyone leaves, that not all love ends in ruins. But after years of disappointment, those words felt like lies even to him. So he replied, "Then maybe you gave your heart to the wrong man, not to the wrong love." Her screen lit up again, and something inside her shifted. The anger was still there, but behind it, curiosity began to grow. Who was this man who seemed to understand her better than anyone? She didn't know it yet, but the messages she sent to a stranger were slowly becoming her way of breathing again. Marco waited for her response, not realizing why he cared so much. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about contracts, meetings, or profits. He was thinking about her, the stranger whose anger felt like his mirror. Somewhere deep down, he hoped she'd keep talking. Because in her fury, he'd found a voice that could still reach his. Marco couldn't understand why he kept rereading her words. Every message felt like a confession meant only for him. There was no filter, no small talk, just raw emotion, the kind people rarely dare to show. It had been years since anyone had spoken to him without expecting something in return. For a man who had everything, it was strange how much he missed honesty. That wrong message had slipped into his life like an accident, but it didn't feel like one anymore. He caught himself thinking about her during meetings, wondering if she had slept, if her anger had cooled. He had known powerful women, beautiful women, but not one who made him feel something real through a screen. He wanted to ask her name, but he didn't. Not yet. It was easier to stay hidden behind words than to risk being seen again. The loneliness he had carried for years began to feel lighter, almost bearable. Lillian, on the other side, was torn. She had told herself she would stop replying. It made no sense to talk to a stranger, especially when her heart was still bleeding. But something about his messages kept pulling her back. They didn't sound like pity, they sounded like truth. Steady, patient, and somehow familiar. Every time she tried to stop, she found herself opening that chat again, typing without thinking. For both of them, it was supposed to end after the first reply. But nights passed and the conversation refused to die. They spoke of heartbreak, of trust, of how easy it is to lose faith in love. They never said their names, never shared details, just two broken souls using words as shelter. The wrong number had found the right person.
He didn't know that on her side of the city, she had started waiting for his messages too. And though neither of them said it out loud, they both felt it. That strange sense that maybe destiny sometimes disguises itself as a mistake. Lillian hadn't planned to text him again. She had promised herself she wouldn't, but silence has a way of feeling too heavy when someone finally listens. The next evening, her phone buzzed first. Sometimes the ones who hurt us are just lessons we didn't ask for, the message read. Her chest tightened. No one had spoken to her like that in weeks. Not to fix her, not to judge her, just to understand. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she finally typed, "You talk like you've been through it too." Marco stared at her message for a long time before replying. He had spent years avoiding that part of himself, the man who used to believe in love. But something in her words made it impossible to stay silent. "I have," he answered, "and I stopped believing it was real until tonight." He didn't know why he said it, but it was true. Somewhere between her pain and his quiet replies, something had started to heal. The walls he built around his heart began to feel less like protection and more like a prison. She read his message 3 times. Her heart pounded, not from romance, but from recognition. It had been so long since she'd felt truly seen. She wanted to ask who he was, but she was afraid the truth might end whatever this strange connection was. So she only replied, "Then maybe we both needed the wrong person to find the right words." It wasn't flirtation, it was surrender. The kind of honesty that can only exist between strangers. From that moment, their messages stopped feeling accidental. They began talking about everything, small regrets, quiet fears, little hopes they thought were gone. Marco found himself smiling at her words, something he hadn't done in years. She, in turn, found comfort in knowing someone was on the other side, listening without judgment. Each message was a spark in the dark. 2 lives that were never meant to cross had suddenly collided in the most unexpected way. And though neither dared to say it, both were waiting for the next message, the next reason to breathe. The messages kept coming, slowly at first, then every night. What began as anger had turned into something neither of them could explain. Lillian found herself typing things she'd never told anyone, not even Rachel, before the betrayal. "Sometimes I wonder if I ever mattered," she confessed one night. "Maybe love is just something people say until it stops feeling convenient." She hesitated before sending it, then placed the phone on her pillow. The response came within seconds. "No," he wrote. "You mattered to the wrong people. That doesn't make you less real." He didn't know why he cared so deeply about this woman he'd never met. Maybe it was the way her words mirrored the emptiness he had buried beneath wealth and success. For years, people had spoken to him out of obligation, never emotion. But she was different, raw, unpredictable, honest. It was like talking to someone who remembered how to feel when he had forgotten. Sometimes her words made him smile, sometimes they hurt. But every message reminded him that he was still alive. She began to wait for him. The sound of her phone buzzing became her favorite part of the evening. His messages weren't romantic, not yet. They were gentle, steady, the kind of comfort that doesn't demand anything in return. She didn't realize how much she needed that, a voice that didn't ask her to move on, just allowed her to be. With every text, her anger began to fade, replaced by something far more dangerous: trust.
Marco started to open up too. Piece by piece, he told her about disappointment, about losing faith in people, about nights that felt too long even in the brightest city. He didn't mention his money or his name. She didn't ask. The mystery between them felt sacred, like a fragile thread holding two lonely worlds together. Their pain spoke the same language, and somehow that was enough. They didn't know each other's faces, but they recognized each other's hearts. And without realizing it, the stranger who listened was becoming the one person she couldn't stop waiting for. Marco's life looked perfect from the outside. People saw the tailored suits, the cars, the headlines. They called him lucky, brilliant, unstoppable. But when the doors closed and the lights went out, there was only silence. He had built an empire, but lost himself inside it. Every deal, every handshake, every smile was just a way to fill the emptiness he couldn't name. The truth was simple. He didn't believe in love anymore, not after losing it once to someone who chose money over meaning. He had spent years pretending it didn't hurt, that the betrayal of his fiancée was just part of life, something men like him were supposed to move past. But late at night, when the city quieted, he still caught himself reaching for someone who wasn't there. Success had given him everything, except peace. And now, for reasons he couldn't explain, a stranger's messages were starting to do what nothing else could: make him feel human again. Every time her name lit up on his screen, something inside him softened. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was recognition. She was broken, yes, but still brave enough to speak from her wounds. He admired that. He envied it. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who could buy anything couldn't buy what she gave him freely: sincerity. Her words reminded him of what it felt like to connect without expectation. He began to find comfort in their silence too. Sometimes they didn't talk much, just a few words, simple, honest, but even that was enough. It was strange how two people who had never met could find peace in each other's pain. It was as if the wrong message had found its way to the only heart willing to listen. And as the days passed, Marco started to wonder, was this destiny or just coincidence? Because somewhere between his loneliness and her heartbreak, something real was beginning to shake tape, and neither of them was ready for what that meant. The messages became their ritual. Every night, after the world quieted, two lights glowed in the dark, one in her small apartment, one in his glass tower. They didn't talk about who they were or what they did. Instead, they spoke about the things people usually keep buried: the fear of being forgotten, the weight of pretending to be fine, the kind of loneliness that doesn't go away just because someone says, "I'm here." Those conversations didn't fix them, but they made the nights bearable. Marco began to look forward to her texts more than he wanted to admit. He didn't tell anyone about her, not his assistant, not the friends who only called when they needed favors. It was his secret. One piece of life that wasn't measured by money or reputation. He found himself checking his phone without realizing it, waiting for her name to appear. Each message felt like oxygen, something small that reminded him he still mattered. Lillian didn't fully understand why she trusted him so much. Maybe because he never asked for details. Maybe because he never judged her for still being angry. She had spent weeks trying to convince herself that love was just a story people told to make heartbreak sound noble. But this, whatever it was, didn't feel like a story. It felt real. It felt safe. For the first time since Liam, she slept without crying.
They didn't talk about meeting. They didn't need to. The words were enough, at least for now. Some nights they stayed up until dawn, sharing pieces of themselves they didn't know still existed. Every confession brought them closer, even though neither said it out loud. It wasn't romance yet. It was something purer. Two lives finding rhythm in the dark. But under all that quiet understanding, something unspoken began to stir. Marco started to wonder how her voice sounded when she laughed. Lillian began to imagine his face when he smiled. And though they didn't say it, both knew the truth. Sooner or later, this connection would demand more than just words. Neither of them noticed when their conversations stopped being about pain. It happened slowly, a shift so subtle it almost went unnoticed. One night, Lillian sent him a meme. The next, he told her about the time he burned pasta, trying to cook like a normal person. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in months. Somewhere between all those messages, the sharp edges of their hearts began to smooth out. It wasn't that the pain disappeared. It was that they had finally found someone who understood it. Marco caught himself smiling at random moments. His assistant even asked if something good had happened. He lied, saying it was a new investment, but the truth was simpler. He finally had someone who saw him beyond his title. Every message from her was like a small reminder that he wasn't completely numb. She asked about his day, teased him about his serious tone, told him that he sounded older than his age. He laughed, typing back, "I'll take that as wisdom." For Lillian, his presence had become a quiet comfort. She stopped checking Liam's social media. She stopped replaying the betrayal in her mind. When Marco texted her, she didn't feel like the woman who had been left behind. She felt like someone worth talking to. He never told her what to do, never rushed her healing. He simply showed up. And sometimes that's all someone really needs. They began sharing the small things, favorite songs, quotes, random memories. One night she sent him a voice note of her humming a tune she couldn't get out of her head. He played it more times than he'd ever admit. It wasn't perfect, it was soft, real, alive. And for the first time in years, the silence in his home didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. He didn't tell her, but her laughter had become his favorite sound. And though they were miles apart, both could feel it. The distance was starting to shrink. Whatever this was, it was healing them in ways they didn't know they still needed. At first, they had made a silent agreement. No names, no past, no real details. It was easier that way. Safer. Just two strangers speaking without history to haunt them. "Let's keep it simple," Lillian had written once. "No reality, no expectations." Marco had agreed. But as the nights stretched into weeks, that rule began to crumble. Curiosity grew stronger than caution. Feelings slipped through the cracks they thought they'd sealed. It started with small things. She told him about her favorite coffee shop, the one where she used to read before everything fell apart. He told him about his old dog, Max, who used to wait by the door even after his fiancée left. They didn't mean to share these things, but they came naturally, wrapped inside jokes and midnight stories. Each confession built another bridge between them, fragile but real. Lillian began to picture the man behind the words. She imagined him with kind eyes and a quiet smile, someone older, steady, maybe even a little broken like her. She caught herself thinking about him during the day, wondering what his voice sounded like, what he did when he wasn't texting. It scared her how much he'd started to mean, but she didn't stop. Somehow, not knowing who he really was made her trust him even more. Marco knew the rules were fading, but he didn't care. Every time her message appeared, it felt like the world paused for a moment. He wanted to protect that, the honesty, the warmth, the way she made him feel seen. She had no idea she was talking to a man who could buy anything, yet she treated him like someone worth listening to, not someone to impress. That kind of purity was rare, almost sacred. One night, without thinking, he wrote her name at the end of a message. "Good night, Lillian." He froze as soon as he sent it. She had never told him her name, but somehow he knew. And on her side of the city, she stared at the screen in shock, her heart racing, torn between fear and something dangerously close to longing. After that night, something changed. Lillian kept staring at the message, "Good night, Lillian." She hadn't written her name anywhere. How did he know? For a second, fear and fascination collided inside her chest. She almost stopped replying, but his next message came. "I guessed. You sound like a Lillian." Somehow that made her smile. No one had said her name like that in a long time, softly, as if it meant something again. She started opening up more. She told him about the things she missed, morning walks, the smell of rain, how she used to hum when she cooked. He never interrupted, never tried to fix anything. He just listened. And when he did speak, his words carried the kind of calm that made her believe maybe she wasn't broken after all. There was a safety in their distance, a kind of closeness that didn't demand too much, but still felt like everything. Marco, meanwhile, couldn't get her out of his mind. He tried to focus on work, but her voice, the one he imagined, kept intruding. He pictured her smile when she typed, the way she might frown before sending something too honest. He didn't know her face, but he could see her, in the rhythm of her words, in the spaces she left when she hesitated. He realized that, without meaning to, he had fallen for the girl behind the messages. He told himself it was impossible. He didn't even know her last name. But the truth was that Lillian had become part of his everyday. Her texts were his morning coffee, her good nights the only part of the day that felt peaceful. She was no longer a stranger. She was the only real thing left in his life. Lillian felt it too. The way her heart reacted when her phone lit up, the warmth in her chest when she read his messages. She tried to remind herself that it wasn't love, that it couldn't be, but deep down, she knew. Whatever was happening between them had already crossed every rule they'd made, and the thought of meeting him scared her as much as it thrilled her. It happened on a quiet Thursday night. Their conversation had drifted into one of those deep, easy talks about trust, second chances, and how people sometimes meet at the wrong time. Lillian had just written, "Maybe love is about timing, not luck." She didn't expect a reply right away, but then his message came through. "Then let's test it. Have coffee with me." Her breath caught. She read it 3 times, her pulse racing with every word. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, frozen between fear and curiosity. He wasn't supposed to ask that. They had agreed to keep their connection inside the safety of messages. Meeting meant risk. It meant reality. What if he wasn't who she thought he was? What if everything shattered the second they saw each other's faces? But part of her also whispered, what if it didn't? Marco hesitated after sending it. He hadn't planned to. It just slipped out. Weeks of quiet connection had turned into something too strong to ignore. He didn't want to hide behind a screen anymore. He wanted to see the woman who had unknowingly brought light back into his life. He imagined her smile, her eyes, her voice saying his name for the first time. It scared him. How much he wanted something he told himself he no longer believed in. Lillian finally replied after what felt like hours. Where? That single word made his heart race like he hadn't felt in years. He smiled, typing back quickly. Downtown, Cafe Mirabelle, Saturday, 7 p.m. He hesitated, then added, "If you don't show up, I'll understand." He sent it before he could change his mind. That night, neither of them slept. Lillian tried to convince herself it was a bad idea, while Marco replayed every message they had ever shared. They both knew that once they met, everything would change, one way or another. And as Saturday approached, both hearts carried the same fear and the same hope. Saturday came faster than either of them expected. Lillian stood in front of her mirror, trying to decide if she was insane.
She'd changed her outfit 3 times already, not because she wanted to impress him, but because she didn't know what version of herself he expected to meet. Her palms were cold, her stomach a knot of fear and hope. For days she'd tried to convince herself she wouldn't go, but at 6:45, she found herself walking toward the cafe anyway, her heart beating louder with every step.
Marco arrived early. He never arrived early for anything. The moment he stepped inside, the scent of coffee mixed with rain carried a strange familiarity. He chose a quiet table by the window, the same one where he used to sit years ago with the woman he once loved. Tonight, it felt different. He wasn't waiting out of habit or duty. He was waiting because, for the first time in years, someone had made him want to. The minutes stretched endlessly. Every time the door opened, Lillian's breath hitched. She scanned every face, unsure what she was even looking for. Then, at 7:03, she saw him. Tall, composed, but with eyes that carried the same quiet sadness she had felt through every message. He smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that reaches the eyes. And just like that, she knew it was him. She hesitated at first, frozen near the entrance. He stood up, hands slightly shaking, the calm businessman suddenly unsure of what to do with his own heartbeat. For a second, neither spoke. It was as if the months of messages had all led to this silence, one charged with everything they hadn't yet said. Then she smiled nervously. "Marco?" He nodded. "Lillian." When their eyes met, everything else faded. The noise, the people, the rain tapping softly on the glass. It wasn't how either of them imagined it. It was quieter, simpler, real. And as they sat down, awkward but drawn to each other, neither of them realized it yet, but nothing about their lives would ever feel the same again. The moment their eyes met, something shifted, a quiet pull neither of them could name. It wasn't the thrill of meeting someone new. It felt older, heavier, like remembering something they had both forgotten. Marco couldn't stop looking at her. There was a strength in her softness, the kind that comes from surviving heartbreak and still daring to show up. Lillian, on the other hand, felt exposed, as if he could see the version of her she'd been trying to hide. They sat across from each other, their words stumbling at first. Small talk felt strange after so many nights of honesty. "You look exactly how I imagined," he said, voice low. She smiled, unsure if he meant it or was just trying to fill the silence. But there was something sincere in his tone, something that made her chest tighten. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a mistake someone had to forgive. She felt seen. Marco studied her carefully, trying to understand why she felt so familiar. He'd met thousands of people, faces from business dinners, charity events, places he barely remembered. But none of them had ever made him feel like this. He didn't believe in fate, but the way her laugh softened the room made him question everything. It wasn't attraction alone. It was recognition, the kind that feels like you've met before, in another time, another version of life. Lillian noticed the way his gaze lingered, not in the way men look at women they want, but in the way people look at something they didn't realize they needed. It scared her. It also calmed her. Every instinct told her to pull back, to protect herself, but her heart stayed still. She didn't know him, not truly, and yet somehow she did. The stranger behind those messages was right in front of her, and she couldn't look away. Their conversation grew easier. He listened the same way he always had, quietly, fully, as if nothing else mattered. And when she laughed, he smiled like a man who hadn't done so in years.
There, in that cafe filled with half-heard conversations, two people who had never meant to meet sat across from each other, both silently realizing the same thing. Sometimes, the soul recognizes what the mind has yet to understand. Lillian felt it the moment she looked at him closely. Something behind his calm, something he wasn't saying. His smile was genuine, but his eyes carried the kind of silence that comes from living too long with unspoken things. They talked for hours, laughing more than either expected, yet every now and then she caught him drifting, like someone who wanted to tell the truth but wasn't sure how. Still, she didn't press. Maybe she was afraid to know. Maybe part of her already did. Marco tried to stay present, but his mind kept circling the same thought. She doesn't know who I am. The name, the company, the money, all of it had been left out of their messages on purpose. It was easier that way. For once, someone liked him for what he said, not what he owned. But now, sitting across from her, that secret felt heavier. Every laugh they shared made it harder to imagine her reaction when she found out the truth. He studied her as she talked, memorizing the small things, how she brushed her hair behind her ear, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about music. She was nothing like the people who usually surrounded him. There was no pretense, no agenda, just warmth. And it terrified him because he knew that one lie, one secret, could destroy it all.
Lillian noticed his quiet moments, the way he hesitated before answering certain questions, the flicker of sadness that passed through his expression whenever she mentioned betrayal. She couldn't tell what he was holding back, but she sensed it wasn't something small. Still, she stayed. Maybe because she understood what it was like to live with things you can't quite say. Maybe because part of her hoped his silence was the same kind as hers, protective, not deceitful. When they finally said goodbye that night, he held her hand longer than he should have. "It was good to finally meet you," he said softly. "It was," she whispered. As she walked away, he watched her until she disappeared into the crowd, feeling the truth rise in his throat, the truth he still couldn't bring himself to tell. The days after their meeting felt unreal. They texted more than ever, but now every word carried something unspoken. Lillian felt it, a slight hesitation in his replies, the pauses that didn't exist before. Something was shifting, and she couldn't tell if it was good or dangerous. She didn't know that each message he sent came with a battle inside him. Every time she said his name, every time she smiled through her texts, Marco felt the weight of the secret he was keeping. He had almost told her that night. When she laughed, when she said she was glad she came, the words nearly slipped out. "I'm the man your ex used to work for." But the fear of changing everything held him back. He didn't want her to see him as the billionaire from the headlines. He wanted her to keep seeing the man who had listened, who had cared when no one else did. But the truth had a way of pressing against his chest until it hurt. At first he thought he could control it, keep his world separate, her warmth on one side, his reality on the other. But one evening, her words cut too close. "It's strange," she wrote. "My ex used to talk about his boss, the one who built that company from nothing. He sounded like someone who had everything but was always alone." Marco froze, staring at the screen, his heart dropping. For a moment, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. He didn't reply right away. He couldn't. Every instinct told him to lie, to deflect, to change the subject. But she noticed his silence. "Are you there?" she wrote again. He typed back, fingers unsteady. "Yeah, just a busy night." She believed him, for now. But deep down, she felt a strange chill, as if her heart already knew something her mind wasn't ready to face. That night,
Marco couldn't sleep. He stood by the window, phone in hand, watching messages he couldn't send. He had spent years hiding behind power and success, but this was different. This was the first time he was afraid of losing something that actually mattered. The secret wasn't just about who he was, it was about how much she already meant to him. It happened without warning. One message, one sentence, and everything began to unravel. Lillian had gone out for coffee with an old coworker who still worked at the same company Liam once did. The conversation was casual until his name came up. "It's funny," she said. "The boss, Marco Steele, just mentioned a few weeks ago that one of his former employees got fired for stealing money, some guy named Liam." The cup nearly slipped from her hand. Her pulse froze. Marco. Her Marco. Her mind started spinning. She tried to reason with herself. It can't be him. But the pieces fit too perfectly. The name, the voice, the way he spoke about disappointment and betrayal. Every puzzle she hadn't realized she was building suddenly made sense. That night, she opened her phone with shaking hands. Marco Steele, she typed into the search bar. The first photo that appeared was him, standing in front of a sleek glass building, the same eyes that had looked at her across the cafe. Her stomach dropped. Anger returned, but this time it was sharper than before, mixed with heartbreak and disbelief. "You knew," she whispered to the empty room. He had listened to her cry over Liam, over Rachel, over the lies, and all this time he had been part of that world. She texted him, hands trembling. "How long were you planning to hide who you are?" When he saw the message, Marco felt his chest tighten. He had known this moment would come. He just didn't expect it to hurt this much. He called her immediately, but she didn't answer. The messages came fast. "I didn't mean to lie. I just wanted you to see me before you saw everything else."
But she couldn't read them without feeling betrayed all over again. It wasn't about the money, the status, or the headlines. It was the fact that he had known her story from the start. Her ex had worked for him. He had known the details of her pain before she ever spoke them. That night she blocked his number. The chat that had once been her safe place now felt poisoned. Marco sat in silence, staring at the screen, every word he wanted to say trapped behind the one truth that had ruined it all. He had fallen in love with her long before he had the courage to tell her who he really was. Days turned into weeks, but for Marco, time stopped the night she walked away. He went to work, attended meetings, smiled when he had to, but every word felt hollow. The messages were gone, but he still caught himself unlocking his phone, hoping her name might appear. It never did. He had faced million-dollar losses without blinking, yet losing her was something he couldn't measure or fix. He had spent his life solving problems with money, but this couldn't be bought. Lillian tried to move on, but anger and longing lived side by side in her chest. Every time she thought of him, her heart betrayed her, beating faster for someone she swore she no longer trusted. She wanted to hate him for the secret, for the lie, but part of her couldn't forget the man who had listened, the one who had healed her when she didn't think she could be healed. It was a war between her pride and her heart, and neither was winning. He had wanted to reach out 100 times. He even drafted the words, "I'm sorry. You were never part of my plan. You were my salvation." But he never sent them. He told himself that maybe she was better off without him, that his world, filled with attention, expectation, and shadows, would only hurt her more. But the truth was simpler. He was scared. Scared of facing her eyes and realizing he'd destroyed the only real thing he'd ever found. One evening, Marco drove past the cafe where they had met. It was closing time, lights dimming, chairs stacked on tables. He parked outside and sat there,
remembering her laughter, her nervous smile, the way her fingers traced the rim of her cup. For a moment, he imagined her walking through the door again. But dreams like that hurt more than the truth, because they remind you of everything you lost. And somewhere else in the same city, Lillian sat by her window reading their old messages she thought she'd deleted. Every word still felt alive, every sentence a heartbeat she couldn't silence. She wanted to forget him, but she couldn't. Because deep down, even through the anger, she knew he hadn't been her enemy. He had just been another soul, trying to love after being broken too many times. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind of day when everything feels heavier than it should. Lillian was leaving a small bookstore when she saw him. He was standing by the street, umbrella in hand, talking to no one, looking completely lost, the way only someone who's tired of pretending looks. Their eyes met before either could look away. The world went quiet. Every emotion she had buried came rushing back at once. Anger, love, hurt, longing. She could barely breathe.
Marco froze where he stood. He hadn't planned to see her again, hadn't even known she'd be there. But the moment he saw her face, every wall he'd built crumbled. He stepped forward slowly, afraid she'd run. "Lillian," he said softly, almost afraid of the sound of her name. She didn't answer. The way she looked at him, cold, distant, told him everything he had feared. Yet he stayed there, soaked in the rain, refusing to look away. She finally spoke, her voice trembling. "You lied to me, Marco. You listened to my pain, knowing exactly who I was talking about." He opened his mouth to speak, but she continued. "You let me trust you. You let me heal through you, and the whole time, you were part of it." Her words were sharp, but her eyes betrayed her. Beneath the fury was heartbreak, the kind that comes from losing something real. He stepped closer, voice low but steady. "You're right. I should have told you. I was afraid you'd see me like everyone else does, as a man with everything but heart. You were the only one who saw me differently, and I didn't want to lose that." His voice broke slightly. "But I never used you, Lillian. Not once." The rain hit harder, filling the silence between them. She wanted to believe him. Part of her already did. But trust isn't something that returns just because someone says sorry. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "You already lost me." Then she turned away, leaving him standing there, drenched and motionless. For a long time, Marco didn't move. He just watched her disappear into the rain, realizing that sometimes love doesn't end with anger. It ends when two people stop fighting for it. The days that followed felt endless. For Lillian, every hour carried the weight of words unsaid. She deleted his number again, though she knew it by heart. Her phone stayed silent, but somehow that silence was louder than any fight they'd ever had. She kept thinking she'd feel lighter, that cutting him out would finally free her. Instead, the emptiness settled deep, a quiet ache she couldn't name. Every night she caught herself opening the old chat, reading the last messages like a wound she couldn't stop touching. Marco didn't try to reach her again. He wanted to, every day, every hour, but guilt and pride held him back. He told himself he was respecting her decision, giving her space, but the truth was simpler. He was afraid that if he heard her voice again, he wouldn't be able to let her go. His apartment felt colder, emptier. He went through the motions, meetings, dinners, meaningless conversations, but none of it mattered. The silence she left behind filled every corner of his life. At night, he'd scroll through their messages, reading them from the beginning, the jokes, the confessions, the late-night thoughts. It felt like looking through a life that never fully existed, a love written in pixels, now frozen in time.
He typed out messages he never sent. "I miss you. I wish I'd told you sooner. I wish you'd stayed." Then he'd delete them one by one, because hope hurt too much. Lillian tried to bury herself in routine, work, errands, fake smiles. But every time someone mentioned his name in the news, her stomach tightened. She told herself she hated him, that it was betrayal, not love. Yet her heart refused to listen. Sometimes she'd catch herself smiling at nothing, remembering something small he'd said. It was infuriating how someone could still make her heart ache, even from miles away.
And so the silence between them became its own language, one made of what-ifs and almosts. Neither of them knew it yet, but sometimes silence isn't the end. Sometimes it's just the pause before destiny decides to try again. It had been months since they'd last spoken. The city had changed seasons twice, winter giving way to spring, cold turning into warmth. Lillian had rebuilt her life piece by piece, quietly, carefully. She didn't talk about him anymore, but his presence lived in the pauses between her thoughts. Every so often, she'd think of a line he once wrote and feel that familiar ache in her chest. She told herself it was over. She almost believed it. Marco had done the same, or at least he tried. He buried himself in work, traveled, smiled for cameras, signed deals, all the things that used to make him feel powerful. But now, every success felt empty. Her silence had become the background noise of his days, a reminder that not all losses are visible. He still looked for her face in crowds without meaning to. Every time he passed the cafe, he slowed down, just in case. Fate, however, has its own timing. One late afternoon, a storm rolled in, sudden, fierce, almost violent. Lillian was crossing a street when her umbrella flipped inside out, rain soaking through her jacket. She ran into the nearest building, heart pounding, hair dripping, and froze when she heard his voice. "You always run from storms like that?" She turned, and there he was, standing just a few feet away, holding a coffee, smiling that same unsure smile she remembered. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The sound of rain filled the space between them, louder than words, softer than anger. Marco took a slow step forward. "I didn't plan this," he said quietly, "but I've been waiting for it." Lillian's throat tightened. Every part of her told her to leave, to protect herself, but her heart refused to listen. She took a breath, eyes shining with a mix of disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. They stood there, drenched in memory and hesitation. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't love again. It was something in between, fragile, trembling, alive. And as thunder echoed outside, both knew what they couldn't say out loud. Some connections don't fade with silence. They wait. They sat across from each other again, soaked from the storm, the same way they had once met. Only this time, everything felt heavier, more fragile. Lillian's heart pounded as Marco looked at her with that same quiet intensity she remembered. Neither spoke for a long time. The air between them was thick with everything that had been left unsaid. Finally, he took a slow breath and said, "There's something I never told you." She almost stopped him. Part of her didn't want to hear it, afraid another truth would hurt as much as the first. But his eyes held something different this time. Not guilt, not pride, just vulnerability. "That night," he began, "when you sent that message, I was sitting alone, drinking, thinking about ending everything." His voice faltered. "I'd spent years building things that meant nothing. Everyone I loved had left, and I couldn't find a reason to stay." Lillian's breath caught, her anger melting into silence. "Then your message came," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "A wrong number, but your pain sounded like mine. And somehow, that made me want to keep breathing." Lillian felt tears burning her eyes. She tried to speak, but words failed. She had spent months believing she was the broken one, that her mistake had ruined her life. But now she saw it differently. Her pain had saved someone else's. Her heartbreak had reached another lost soul at the exact moment he needed it most. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I never imagined." Marco shook his head softly. "You weren't supposed to. You don't owe me anything. I just needed you to know that what started as a mistake, it wasn't one for me." For a moment, all the noise of the world faded. There were no more lies, no more titles, no more what-ifs. Just two people who had finally said the truth that had lived between them since the very beginning. The storm outside had quieted, replaced by the steady rhythm of rain against glass. Soft, constant, like a heartbeat. And though Lillian didn't know what would happen next, one thing became clear. Not all wrong messages are accidents. Some are invitations, sent by life itself, reminding us that sometimes even pain has a purpose. Lillian couldn't stop thinking about what he said. The idea that her pain had saved him felt impossible, almost too heavy to hold. But in the quiet after the storm, she began to see all the moments that had led them there, the invisible threads she hadn't noticed before. "There's something else," Marco said gently. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "When you stopped answering me, I didn't disappear from your life completely." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "After you blocked me, I still kept up with the community projects your company worked with. The bookstore you go to, I made a donation anonymously so it wouldn't close. The women's shelter you posted about, I funded their expansion." Her eyes widened, her breath catching. "You helped all those places?" He nodded, looking down. "Not because I wanted credit, because you once told me those were the places that made you feel safe. I wanted to protect them, even when I couldn't protect us." For a long time, she couldn't speak. The realization hit hard. He hadn't just said he cared. He had shown it, quietly, without needing her to see. It wasn't grand gestures or empty words. It was love in its truest form. Steady, selfless, quiet. The kind that stays even when you walk away. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally whispered. He looked up, meeting her eyes with a faint, tired smile. "Because it was never about me, Lillian. It was about you finding your way back to yourself." Her tears came before she could stop them. All the anger, all the confusion, all the pain that had held her for months began to dissolve. She saw him differently now, not as the man who lied, but the man who stayed, even from afar. The one who had turned guilt into kindness and love into something that healed instead of hurt. "You shouldn't have had to do all that," she said softly. "Maybe not, but I wanted to." The room fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, forgiveness, and something that had never truly died between them. Lillian reached across the table, taking his hand. "Maybe," she said quietly, "we were never a mistake. Maybe we were just late."
After that night, they didn't talk for a few days. Not because they were angry this time, but because words suddenly felt too small. There was peace in the silence now, the kind that only comes after every truth has been told. Lillian found herself smiling again for no reason, replaying pieces of their conversation in her mind. She had spent so long trying to understand what love was, and now she finally did. Love wasn't grand or perfect. It was quiet, imperfect, real. Marco, too, felt different. For years, he'd lived surrounded by noise, meetings, interviews, the endless rhythm of ambition. But now, everything felt still. He'd told her the truth. He had nothing left to hide. And yet, there was one thing he still needed to say. Something simple, something he'd held back since the beginning. He sat in his study late one evening, phone in hand, looking at her contact name, the one he hadn't changed since the first night. Unknown. He started typing and erasing over and over. Every version sounded too much or too little. Finally, he stopped trying to make it perfect and just wrote what he felt. No wealth, no secrets. just one truth. I love you. He stared at it for a long time before pressing send. For the first time in years, he didn't feel afraid. He wasn't the lonely millionaire anymore. He was just a man in love. Lillian's phone buzzed a few minutes later. She was reading before bed, the same way she used to when their story began. Seeing his name on the screen made her heart race, not with fear this time, but with recognition. She opened the message and read it once, twice, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't reply right away. She didn't need to. Some words don't ask for answers. They just remind you you're still capable of feeling. She placed the phone on her nightstand, smiling through her tears. Outside, the city lights flickered softly, just like that first night. The wrong message had started it all, a mistake that had become the most honest thing either of them had ever lived. And as she closed her eyes, Lillian whispered into the quiet, "I love you too." Years later, people still asked Lillian how she met him. She always smiled and said, "By accident." But deep down, she knew better. What happened between them wasn't luck, and it wasn't coincidence. It was life, messy, unpredictable, beautiful. The message that was never meant to be sent had become the beginning of everything that mattered. Sometimes the universe doesn't get the address wrong, it just reroutes the message to the heart that needs it most. They built something steady, something quiet. No headlines, no secrets. Just mornings with coffee and laughter, nights with words softer than silence. Marco had changed too, no longer the man hiding behind power and walls, but someone who understood that love isn't about fixing brokenness. It's about holding it gently. Together they had learned that the most fragile things often last the longest when handled with care. There were still days when she'd find herself tracing old scars, the betrayal, the pain, the storm that had brought them here. But now those memories didn't hurt the same. They were reminders, proof that even the most painful beginnings can lead to gentle endings. Every time she looked at him, she saw both the ache and the miracle. The man who once read her anger had become the one who understood her silence.
One evening, as they sat by the window watching the rain, Marco looked at her and smiled. "Do you ever think about that first message?" he asked. She laughed softly. "Every day," she said. "It still feels unreal." He took her hand, eyes warm and steady. Maybe it wasn't wrong after all. She squeezed his fingers, smiling. No, it was exactly where it needed to go. And just like that, in the quiet rhythm of an ordinary night, their story came full circle. Two hearts that found each other in the chaos, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with perfection, they start with a mistake. Sometimes the biggest turning points in life begin with a single wrong move. One mistaken text, one moment of weakness, and everything changes. Lillian never planned to meet Marco. He never planned to love again. Yet somehow, their broken pieces fit together. Proof that even pain can lead you exactly where you're meant to be. Maybe that's the real secret of love. It doesn't always arrive wrapped in perfection. Sometimes it finds you through mistakes, misunderstandings, and timing that makes no sense until it does. The wrong message became their miracle, and maybe, just maybe, that's how destiny works. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt that life redirected you in ways you couldn't explain? Have you ever met someone by accident who changed everything? Tell me in the comments. Your story might touch more hearts than you think. And don't forget, if this story moved you, like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. There are more emotional stories waiting for you here. Stories that will remind you that sometimes love arrives exactly when and how it's supposed to.